Hello, and welcome to Life Diaries, a space where the pages of life open up, one story at a time. These are tales written by experience, spoken from the heart. Take a moment for yourself, and let's begin. Sarah sharply shrugged her shoulders and, exhaling deeply, fixed her gaze on the window pane. The view outside, however, brought no relief. On the dirty, shimmering platform, streaked with rain, the usual station hustle and bustle unfolded, the constant companion of long-distance train departures. In these moments, life seems to accelerate. Movements become feverish. Faces, joyfully startled, and the conductors, especially tense and displeased. In essence, you can understand them. Is it really so difficult for such respectable citizen passengers to arrive at the station in advance? To approach the carriage early and calmly take their seat? No, they absolutely must rush to board at the last minute, only to then crowd together 10 deep, shouting, waving tickets, and simultaneously storming the narrow passage, which isn't even tall enough for everyone. Look, there's a lady in a clearly restrictive skirt, agonizing over how to hoist her leg onto the step without damaging her outfit or dignity. Honestly, it's amusing. Found something to set off on a journey in. And someone who still has the carriage assault ahead of them, in the last, especially critical minutes, races along the platform, losing bags, string bags, offspring, and their last strength along the way. Like, for example, this gentleman, dragging 2 wheeled suitcases, with a huge bag piled on top of each. It's truly amazing how some people manage to pack so much stuff for a trip. Pure dung beetles or ants, capable of moving loads many times exceeding their own weight. And it would be fine if it were just things, but some people stock up on provisions as if it's their last chance to satisfy hunger. Look at that stout auntie, shuffling her feet quickly, with her arms spread wide, clutching a dozen bread baguettes between them. Obviously, the woman fears not reaching her destination and simply dying of exhaustion en route, although with such a build, she could, it seems, live for at least a year without resorting to food at all, especially bread, which, by the way, would only do her good. Oh, and who is this striding so unperturbed? Look at the type. Glasses on his nose, and in his hands such an impressive collection of crosswords that you can see it even from here. Well, I'll be intelligentsia. He'll pretend to be a know-it-all the whole way, while constantly peeking at the back of the magazine every other word, searching for the correct answer. And if you, sir, are so smart, why do you check your ticket every 5 steps, and then raise your head, searching for the carriage number sign? Do your 2, or perhaps even 3, diplomas not help you simply remember the necessary number and calmly find it? Ah, that's it. The calmness has vanished. He looked at his watch, realized he was late, and also raced along the platform like a goose. And someone, on the contrary, has frozen in place, suppressing the urge to rush away, without waiting for the train to finally move. These are obviously the well-wishers. Look, for example, there's a fussy, thin uncle hovering, who just moments ago, straining, helped a rather unattractive lady into the carriage, whose build was about 3 times his own. Madam gave him a very expressive, angry glare as a parting shot, and even, for greater conviction, thrust her fist under his nose. The man's face shows clear relief and joy, which he very clumsily masks with feigned sorrow. Probably got rid of his dearest wife, at least for a while, and now he's trying his hardest not to jump for joy right here on the platform. And here's another type of well-wisher, so to speak, the romantic one. A thin, pale girl, with smeared lipstick on her lips and obvious streaks of mascara on her cheeks. What do we have here? A real drama. I wonder who she's seeing off. Ah, that guy over there. There he is, leaning out of the carriage doorway, and the conductor, far from romantic, is apparently trying to shove him back in. Well, I'll be. Looks like they're in love. How sweet, if you ignore the fact that the guy is clearly pleased. Look how happily he's waving his arms, almost falling off the step. And the girl, on the contrary, is all in sadness. Obviously, she feels that nothing good will come of this parting for her personally. Yes, my dear girl, yes. Your boy will leave for the capital now, and you'll only see him again if you're lucky. Sally suddenly snapped out of it and listened to her own thoughts with astonishment. What was wrong with her? Where did all this bile come from? So much malicious irony towards completely unfamiliar and innocent people. Why was she standing by the carriage window and practically spitting sparks of irritation? She had never been like this. What kind of absurd, and most importantly, malicious thoughts were swirling in her head? After all, perhaps things were completely different. Perhaps the man with the enormous luggage is the father of a large family, and per member, there's only one bag or one suitcase, which is perfectly normal. And now, instead of a hoarder, we see a man bravely carrying the belongings of his entire family. Who does he have there? Perhaps 5 children are waiting for him on the bunks in the compartment. And the auntie with the baguettes is the mother of the family, and the rolls in her hands are just a couple of snacks. And the intelligent man with the crossword collection is actually a brilliant person, an erudite. And far from peeking at the answers, on the contrary, he composes these puzzles himself. And with the well-wishers, things could be completely different too. The guy and the girl really love each other, and she's crying not from suspicion and bad premonitions, but from separation. And he's just a cheerful person who expresses his sadness with a smile. He went on business, and when he returns, they'll get married, and everything will be very good for them. And the lady in the narrow skirt, good for her. She waved her hand, smiled shyly, and pulling the fabric higher, climbed into the carriage, causing a wave of joyful approval from both the well-wishers and the waiting men. Indeed, a train journey is no reason to dress in shapeless, ugly clothes. A woman should always remain a woman, if her soul demands makeup, a skirt, and heels. A long-distance carriage is no obstacle to that at all. And even this skinny uncle, maybe he's happy simply because he managed to shove his immense wife into the carriage, because she could easily not have fit through the door. Although, no, regarding this man, her initial suspicions are most likely correct. He's pacing too impatiently. Clearly, he has more interesting plans, and he doesn't want to waste a minute of his free time. Feeling herself being carried away again, and the smile that had appeared on her face transforming back into a sarcastic smirk, Sarah moved away from the window. No, it really wasn't normal that she was so irritated. She needed to get a grip somehow and not turn into a wicked shrew. She went into the compartment and sat down in her seat. The reason for this bilious outburst was, in principle, understandable. Sarah couldn't stand trains and everything associated with them. The very thought that instead of 4 hours of dozing in an airplane seat, she would have to spend 3 nights and 2 days in a train carriage, constantly getting up, sitting down, even lying down, if, of course, she dared to do so, simply tormented her. She had never in her life spent so much time on a train before. Such a long journey frankly scared her. And in general, she couldn't shake off the absurd and foolish but persistent thought that having boarded the carriage as a relatively young woman, she would emerge from it a gray-haired and trembling old woman. The long train journey was forced, the only possibility to return home in the near future. Sarah Roberts, a financial auditor for a large company, was on a business trip to one of the holding's most remote enterprises. The deadlines for the audit, initiated by the firm's management, were indefinite, and Sarah hadn't booked a return ticket, assuming it was never too late to do so. Imagine her astonishment when, instead of the usual ticket form, she was handed some kind of slip. "What is this?" she asked, surprised. "It's a train ticket," the girl from the factory secretariat announced cheerfully. "You know what?" Sally exclaimed, indignant. "You must be joking. Take this nonsense back. I'm not going by train. Well, that's wonderful. The cheeky girl nodded. In that case, Ms. Roberts, you'll be staying with us for a long time. Well, at least for another month. Understand? Seeing that Sally was boiling, the girl decided to explain herself after all. This isn't the capital, you know. There are only 2 flights a week, and tickets for them are bought up a month, sometimes even 2 months in advance. Especially now, in the middle of vacation season. So what? Why should that concern me? Your duty is to provide me with a ticket, so be good enough to provide it. And I don't care how you do it. I need to fly out the day after tomorrow, or at the latest, in 2 days. I need to be there by Wednesday. There you go. I've fulfilled my duties. I've provided you with a ticket. You'll leave by train tomorrow and be there on Wednesday. The girl, it seemed, was very self-assured and looked at Sally quite defiantly. It became clear that arguing further was simply pointless. Sarah snatched her ticket from the girl's fingers and picked up her phone. "Hello, this is the airline ticket office," she said into the receiver. "I need a ticket for tomorrow's flight." "You know, so do I," came the reply from the receiver. "Disgraceful," Sarah articulated clearly to the giggling interlocutor and hung up. She simply couldn't stand train journeys. All that road romance, the groves and fields flashing past the window, the wires and poles racing alongside the carriage, brought her no joy. Tears of tenderness didn't well up at the beauty and vastness of the Russian expanses, and she didn't feel like reciting Yesenin's poems. On the contrary, the flashing trunks quickly brought on a slight nausea. The clicking of the wheels, which many passengers found comforting, didn't soothe her, but rather irritated her. The food, which again, many passengers actively used to brighten a long journey, stuck in Sarah's throat, causing sensations similar to those from the flickering outside the window. She could only sleep normally if 3 conditions were met: complete darkness, complete silence, and complete stillness. It's not hard to guess that with such demands, there was no question of Sally sleeping on the train. How could anyone possibly sleep when everything around you is shaking, creaking, banging, flashing with glimpses of light, and talking in different voices? Oh, here's the most important thing: the notorious carriage conversation, which for some reason is considered mandatory. As if the fact that people suddenly find themselves in a confined space makes them almost relatives and like-minded souls on issues of raising children, growing flowers, the terrible quality of products in stores, and real estate prices, which are, well, just a disgrace and keep soaring. And if someone doesn't want to participate in these discussions, they immediately become unpleasant to everyone, and generally a very suspicious person. Such outcasts are looked at pointedly, and eventually, the person without interests is forced to shamefully leave the compartment so as not to disturb normal people discussing vital topics. In short, the entire carriage environment was deeply unpleasant for Sarah. Okay, never mind. I'll just sit as long as I can. I'll think about my own things, maybe read, doze off. In short, I'll survive somehow. She finally resigned herself to the inevitable, listening to the very wheels that had begun clicking over the points as the train started moving. The women in the compartment seemed normal. At least they were quiet for now and hadn't taken out their cutlets from their bags. And then her resignation was once again put in danger. What danger? Simply ruthless destruction. "Oh, my dear, I see you have the Amateur Gardener magazine. Are you into tomatoes, are you? Oh, wonderful. Tell me, darling, have you tried planting the Moscow ultra-early tomato?" Came the words from the lower bunk neighbor, addressed to another passenger. The lively elderly woman looked with pleasure at the younger, more energetic lady. At least, the upper bunk didn't bother her at all. "Oh, wait!" The owner of the upper bunk deftly flew down and stared at the old woman in admiration. "What did you say?" "No, I don't even know that one. I always plant Ural. It's early, too." "Oh, come now. That's last century." authoritatively declared the native of, at least, the first half of that very last century, and somewhat closer to its beginning. There's a wonderful variety, Moscow early ripening. You absolutely must try it. It's absolutely amazing. I planted in May directly into open ground. And most importantly, it doesn't require pinching at all. Oh, really? Her interlocutor exclaimed in surprise and even pressed her hands together in silent rapture. Yes, yes. And its tops are so wonderful, fragrant, so bright. It's a pity you can't give them to piglets, but mine happily gobble up carrot tops too, although some smart Alecs also say, you can't. The elderly woman continued to unfold the picture of her hobbies before her admiring interlocutor. Oh yes, you shouldn't listen to just anyone. What do they understand? The other woman actively agreed. Nothing will happen. I, by the way, love fresh tops myself. In a salad, in soup, and you can chew on them just like that. Oh, and do you know how much they help with joints? Yes, the specialist in growing unpinched tomatoes became interested. Aha! The lover of tops exclaimed. So, here's the thing. You take a couple of the fluffiest carrot tails, chop them up, brew them with boiling water, and then… Sarah slid off her seat, and feeling the pitying glances on her back, left the compartment. The day was drawing to a close. The sun, hanging exactly on the side Sarah was looking out of the carriage window, had dipped towards the horizon and was flooding everything around with a pinkish golden light, casting reflections on the glass. It was very beautiful, and even a nature as thick-skinned as Sarah Roberts felt this beauty. As her mother used to say about her jokingly, when romanticism and rapture were being handed out, our Sally was pushing her way to the front rows in the queue for intelligence and persistence. Her mother chuckled, hinting at her daughter's decidedly unladylike character. Sally, indeed, very rarely admired landscapes, still lifes, and other picturesque combinations. But this time, perhaps because there was nothing else to do, and for the first time in many days, or maybe even years, she simply stood idle with no particular thoughts. She sincerely admired the summer sunset, piercing the entire space between the horizon and the moving carriage with crimson golden rays. Beautiful, Sarah breathed out in admiration, and, it turned out, she said it aloud, because a similar sigh was heard next to her, as if in response, and a man's voice. Indeed, Ms. Roberts, very beautiful. I just never expected you to pay attention to such things. Sally started in surprise and didn't even immediately realize she had been addressed by her full name, and when she suddenly recognized the voice, she just shook her head. If there was anything she lacked to completely and irrevocably hate carriage life, it was the presence of this man here. Honestly, she would rather have stayed in her compartment, listened to her neighbors' gossip, and perhaps become imbued with the ideas of folk medicine and garden-related values. In any case, her chances of that were higher than of having a normal conversation with the man who had suddenly ruined her enjoyment of the sunset. She raised her head and squinted. Well, I'll be, Chris Stevens, she exclaimed, rather ineptly feigning joy. What a pleasant surprise, is that you? Yep, it's me, he confirmed, also joyfully, but unlike her, he seemed sincere. Can you imagine what an unexpected meeting? And I'm standing here, you see, looking, and I can't believe my eyes. I even rubbed them. Good heavens, I thought, it's Sarah Roberts herself in person. Not Marie, but Maria, she hissed through her teeth. I've told you 1,000 times, stop mutilating my name with some silly village accent. Save your boisterous simplicity for gullible girls. Oh, don't be offended. I didn't come up with that. That's what they called you at our factory. Our, you see, Sarah the Crafty. You really wove some intricate lace there in 2 weeks. So intricate. Now the whole management team is sitting here trying to figure out how we're going to untangle it. He spoke with a serious expression, but his eyes were openly laughing. "You're all lying," Sally suddenly declared, "as if I don't know that all the stupid and, by the way, not funny at all jokes going around the factory are your doing. In short, all this nastiness comes from you. And as for the business, you shouldn't have tangled things up, that is, let things get so out of hand. Then you wouldn't have to sit here with the whole management team now. By the way, maybe someone else will end up sitting there too. Well, in the literal sense, for real. For negligence in reporting." Sarah got worked up. "And personally, if I were you, esteemed Chris Stevens, I wouldn't be so calm and self-assured. After all, the chief engineer isn't the last person at the factory. So, in short, I don't want to talk to you, especially on such topics. And in general, I don't like seeing you. The thought that this pleasure will last 2 days makes me shiver. So, on the contrary, this is a terribly unpleasant unpleasantness. That's all. I wish you success." She turned her back on the man and dashed towards her compartment, and suddenly stopped, as if she had run into an invisible wall and couldn't believe her ears. A quiet laugh came from behind. She turned around in astonishment. He was indeed laughing. And suddenly Sarah caught herself thinking that she hadn't seen anything more attractive in a long time. Unless, of course, you counted today's sunset. Still, despite all his awful demeanor, strange sense of humor, and monstrous, inexplicably based self-confidence, he, Chris Stevens, was handsome. Well, just handsome. And that was that. And denying it was as foolish as claiming that the sun wasn't setting at that moment, but rising. Now, when he wasn't dressed in greasy overalls, his cheeks were cleanly shaven, and there wasn't a routine smudge of machine oil on his forehead or nose, it was especially noticeable. His rather fine, regular features didn't make his face effeminate. On the contrary, it was 100% masculinity, but beautiful masculinity. But the main adornment of his face was his eyes, light gray, clear, framed by dark lashes. In combination with his dark hair, high forehead, white teeth, and excellent build, it was all quite striking. And the most amazing thing was that the owner of all this external wealth was completely natural, and seemed to say to everyone around him with his whole appearance, "Well, yes, I'm handsome, I know, but it's not my fault I was born this way. Although, honestly, I'm not complaining. If I've offended anyone by this, I apologize, but generally speaking, it's nonsense." So, what were we going to talk about? But despite all his attractiveness, Sarah couldn't stand him. She had gotten to know Stevens quite well during the 2 weeks she spent at the factory, acknowledged his merits, at least some of them, and, it must be said, was even indebted to him for saving her life, literally. And yet, she couldn't help herself. She found him deeply unsympathetic. But sometimes it happens that people are simply unpleasant to each other without objective reasons, without explanations, on the level of feelings and emotions. That was exactly how it was for her, for Sarah, towards the factory's chief engineer, Stevens. And it seemed the antipathy was mutual. At any rate, he didn't miss a single opportunity to needle her, often quite painfully. In short, her relationship with Stevens was difficult and not particularly pleasant. And this was all the more terrible because he was, undoubtedly, interesting, handsome, brave, decisive, intelligent. And there was something else, something she couldn't formulate, but only vaguely felt. And this something bothered her, interfered with her life. Because of this, she was even angrier at Stevens. He was even more obnoxious because of all this. "He's like some nasty thing in enticingly beautiful packaging," she thought angrily, flopping into her seat and startling her neighbors, who even paused their discussion of composting or mulching. For Sarah, however, it was all the same. "What's wrong, dear?" the older woman asked, looking at Sarah anxiously. You have spots all over your face. Wait, I'll pour you some tea from my thermos with chamomile and honey. It's very calming. Maybe you need something else? Yes, Sarah nodded. Like, would you help me throw someone out of the carriage? This unfinished Alain Delon is hanging around, you see. Oh, are you talking about Chrissy Kins? The old woman suddenly reacted completely unexpectedly. And it's true. He does look like Fanfan La Tulipe, just older. Yes, a bit sturdier, a bit more solid. And how did I not figure it out myself? About Chrissy Kins? Sally repeated, astonished. You mean you know him? Well, how I know him, the woman smiled. We met at the station while he was helping me out. You see. Oh, we haven't even introduced ourselves yet. And we're traveling together for 2 days. What are your names, my dears? Sarah, she mumbled, trying to put a pleasant expression on her face. It's easy to be silent when you don't know anyone. You're not obliged to socialize, it seems. But now, please. Introductions have been made, and compartment acquaintances are almost like family, at least for the duration of the journey. Sally Kins, wonderful. My name is Ann Johnson, and this is Zoe. The old woman nodded towards her tomato-minded companion. So, who are we talking about? Ah, about Chris. Her face broke into a smile. He helped me so much with my suitcase. Curse it. He dragged it and me along with it to the carriage, squeezed us in. So thanks to him, I'm traveling. Otherwise, I'd still be sitting on my trunk in the station square. Big deal, a savior. Just a normal manly act, Sarah grumbled. He's still a bore. Chrissy Kins, a bore? Ann Johnson exclaimed in surprise. What are you saying, Sally Kins? He's a wonderful person. Oh, really? How long have you known him? A couple of hours? And I've had that pleasure for 2 weeks now, so I know better, Sarah declared. All right, Ann Johnson, I won't argue with you. Sarah waved her hand and lay down on her bunk. Well, I'll be. What a cherub, a savior of old ladies. Siberian Fanfan. He's no Fanfan, he's a braggart. Oh, forget him altogether. As if she had nothing else to worry about. She herself, by the way, had God knows what going on in her life. But deciding not to think about Stevens was much easier than actually not doing so. Her thoughts returned again and again to this man, who was completely unlike anyone she had met in her 35 years of life, and who suddenly, by a strange whim of fate, turned out to be right beside her, literally separated by a thin compartment wall. Sarah found herself at the factory, located in a small Siberian town 3,000 kilometers from the capital, by order of the head of their huge holding, which united more than one such enterprise under its wing. George Alexanders was Sally's patron in the literal and figurative sense of the word. He was an old friend of the Roberts family, was friends with Sally's father, Robert, and, as family legends had it, honestly and openly tried to win the girl away from his friend. But the girl preferred Robert Roberts, became his wife, gave birth to their daughter Sarah, and George, by his own words, remained forever inconsolable, in love, looming before the newlyweds like a perpetual reproach. However, Irene always laughed merrily remembering this story. Oh yes, Georgie, I remember how long and violently you grieved, for 2 days, she nodded, and then you went to the cinema with your Tina. So don't talk nonsense, or people will think we have a love triangle. Despite such details, the trio remained friends throughout their lives, and after burying his friend who had passed away suddenly, George seemed to take responsibility for Irene and 10-year-old Sally, and was very happy when Sarah, finishing school, having outgrown her girlish dreams of a film career, modeling, or sports fame, seriously considered finance as a future profession. That's right, Sally, the by then solid, authoritative, and very wealthy businessman declared. You go study and then come work for me. We have such things unfolding now. You know, I need my own people, especially in these financial matters. where the devil himself would break his leg. Sally graduated from university and, of course, came to work for the very holding where George Alexander's was one of the founders, directors, shareholders, in short, the most important person. Well, everyone will say that you hired me only because I'm a Roberts, the daughter of your friends, she doubted. And why shouldn't I hire you because of that? George asked, surprised. Especially since you're like a daughter to me too. Come on, Sally, don't fill your head with nonsense. Start working. And if it turns out I was wrong about you, well, I'll fire you, regardless of your surname. That's how we'll fix your reputation. But the old businessman was not mistaken. Sarah turned out to be an excellent financier, and each year of work only added to her experience, foresight, and intuition. After a few years, she became the company's chief economist auditor, spending a considerable part of her time traveling to numerous enterprises, firms, factories, mills, and combines, evaluating the correctness of reporting and the efficiency of production. Ms. Roberts, my dear girl. George always addressed her with this strange combination of words when a difficult conversation was ahead. We, or rather, you have a little trip coming up, you see. We need to comb through our factory in Esk. Things have really gone downhill there. In Esk? Sarah asked, surprised. Hasn't it been shut down yet? I thought they were planning to. The profits there are next to nothing. The costs are enormous. Before making such a decision definitively, we need to go, thoroughly study the situation, estimate how much needs to be invested, and whether it's worth it. So, you go. George suddenly became animated. You know, my good friend Chris Stevens has been working there as chief engineer for about 10 years. Quite a man. And you take a closer look at him while you're there. What? In what sense? Sally flared up. In that sense, the man nodded with a smile. George Alexander's, you're completely... I dare remind you, I am married. Oh, come on, Sally. What married? Forgive me, old fool, for meddling in your affairs. I just can't bear to see you suffer and waste your life on a man who never deserved you. All right, that's enough. I apologize. You're a big girl. You'll figure out your own affairs. As for the factory, I repeat again, I will only agree to liquidate it if everything there is completely hopeless. Well, Sal, you know, it's my hometown. There's nowhere else for people to really work there. I wouldn't want to deprive them of their last resort, and the people there are wonderful. So, inwardly scolding her boss for his unexpected sentimentality, Sarah found herself in a distant land, at an old, dilapidated factory that, from her point of view, was pointlessly clinging to life. On the very first day of her business trip, she was convinced that all her suspicions were correct. Everything here was bad, very bad, even worse. The equipment was old, the machines rattled like a pile of scrap metal, and the financial reporting was simply appalling with errors, miscalculations, and outright blunders. Who George was so admiring of, speaking of wonderful people, she frankly didn't understand. She met the chief engineer, that very, quite a man, under rather scandalous circumstances, such that she herself was, frankly, a little ashamed to remember the meeting. For a couple of days, she sat in the accounting office, rummaging through reports, frowning angrily, maintaining a meaningful and tragic silence, frightening the hapless chief accountant with her appearance, and finally said, "All right, well, everything is clear to me here. I need to speak with the management of all this." She gestured around an imaginary figure, meaning the factory disgrace. "But Ms. Roberts, you know the director and his deputy will be here tomorrow. The only management member working now is Stevens. He's our chief engineer." Suddenly, the lady perked up, as if she felt a surge of energy. "It would even be better for you to talk to Chris Stevens. You have many questions about the equipment, don't you?" "Yes, very many," Sarah smirked. "Where is this chief engineer's office of yours?" His office is nearby, the next one down the corridor. But he's not there. He's almost never in his office. The chief accountant replied. Does anyone from your management actually come to work? Just for a change? Sally asked, annoyed. Oh, what are you saying? You misunderstood? He is at work, the woman rattled quickly. He just doesn't sit in his office. He's mostly in the workshops. You can go straight there. They'll show you the way. Only, Ms. Roberts, you should change your shoes. It's not very clean there. It's production, after all. It's not just not very clean here. Sally mimicked the chief accountant, standing up decisively. It's outright dirt everywhere, literally and figuratively. Now, where is your hapless chief engineer? Sarah shouted irritably, trying to be heard over the noise of the machines and prevent her safety helmet from sliding down her nose. She should have listened to that funny, naive woman from accounting and changed her shoes. But now it was too late, and an oily stain of some nasty substance was spreading on her wonderful suede shoe. Out of annoyance, she was ready to immediately grab the throat of that damn chief engineer, because of whom she was trudging through the dirty workshop. Why hapless? A voice asked from somewhere around her knees. She jumped back in fright. A dirty man in overalls was crawling out from under a stationary line, his hands so smeared that they looked alien and simply attached to his sleeves. Why hapless? He continued in a slightly hoarse voice. Quite happy with life, actually. And if I manage to catch the hockey game broadcast tonight, I'll be completely happy. Sarah stared in astonishment at the talking worker. No, this wasn't a factory, but some kind of circus. A big top. Listen, you, she frowned. I'm certainly impressed by your knowledge of your boss's affairs, but just tell me where he is. Where is this so-called chief engineer of yours? Again, you're wrong, the strange worker grumbled. He's not so-called, but quite real. I've had enough, Sarah snapped, angry. This is simply a madhouse. Either you tell me immediately where your Stevens is, or I'll... No need for anything. I'm here, the dirty man in overalls suddenly said. Excuse the appearance, but allow me to introduce myself. Stevens, Chris Stevens. Ah, and why? She struggled to find words, but quickly recovered and almost shouted, Why are you here and in this state? Don't you have anything better to do? What is going on here anyway? Are you management or what? How can anyone take you seriously? That's why everything here is in such a state, because you, the chief engineer of the factory, instead of controlling business processes, organizing, coordinating work, are sitting under some piece of metal and turning nuts. You see, my dear woman, if I don't immediately tighten this nut on the piece of metal now, I'm afraid there will be nothing to organize and coordinate, and nothing to manage either. The business process will break down, the man replied sadly. But she had a distinct feeling that he was laughing inside. His eyes gave him away, large, light gray, shining on that grimy face like two precious stones of very pure and high quality. And what's this, my dear woman? She snapped, recovering herself. I am not your dear, and I am not a woman. Yes, Stevens said, surprised. Well, about the first, I can agree. It's a bit early to call you dear. But what about the second? What are you, if not a woman? And again, that obvious, sly, good-natured mockery. And the faces around, always smiling at something instead of working. Probably those wonderful people, according to George. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to remember something from the numerous trainings she had attended on effective interaction with personnel. But nothing suitable came to mind, so she simply and scandalously burst out, squeaking the ends of her words. That's it! Enough! I'm tired of this! Remember, my name is Sarah Roberts, and I have come for a comprehensive audit of your enterprise, and I have the broadest possible authority, up to and including completely disbanding your sham operation. In 20 minutes, I expect you, Mr. Stevens, in the director's office with documentation for all equipment, and clear explanations for the reasons behind the inefficient use of the fixed assets and assets entrusted to you. I can't make it in 20 minutes. Let's say 40, Stevens said calmly. Ms. Roberts, don't take this as disrespect for your broadest authority, but I absolutely need to get this fixed asset entrusted to me up and running, and I need to wash my assets too. To the laughter of the now quite numerous crowd, he extended his dirty hands towards her, shining with what looked like permanently ingrained grime. Sarah suddenly realized that if she wanted to save face, or rather, what was left of it, she had better keep quiet. She snorted, tilted her nose up, turned sharply on the spot, and almost fell flat on the floor because of a broken heel. Oh dear, who runs around a factory in shoes like that? It's unprofitable. She heard a quiet, slightly hoarse voice, and finally hated its owner completely. Boor, bumpkin, lout, she muttered, limping on her uneven heels towards the factory office. Probably became a boss purely by chance, just because there was no one else to appoint in this hole. All he knows is how to tinker with metal junk. And yet, he thinks he's witty. Well, never mind. I'll organize a satire and humor contest for you. Exactly 40 minutes later, a short, broad-shouldered man walked into the director's office, nodded gravely, and sat down at the desk. Sarah noted his composed movements, excellent suit, and neatly styled hair out of the corner of her eye. Well, thank goodness. At least someone is sane, at least dressed normally, not clowning around, Sally thought, quickly finishing a sentence, and looked up, staring at Stevens in person with astonishment. You, she raised her eyebrows, trying to pretend his appearance didn't surprise her. Well, now that's completely different. You can actually look very decent, it turns out. I can. He nodded with a sigh. Though it rarely happens. Mostly I have to run around the workshop with a wrench, repairing fixed assets. Exactly. Why are you running around? Those are the duties of a repairman, a fitter, or whatever he's called on your staff list. He should be dealing with the equipment. I completely agree with you, Ms. Roberts. Only we have a staff list, a beautiful big one. You read it, and your soul rejoices. But we don't have any repairmen. That's the snag. He nodded seriously. Firstly, I am not Mary A. I am Sarah. Sarah Roberts, she enunciated clearly. And secondly, why don't you have any repairmen? Well, probably for the same reason we don't have turners, millers, general laborers, and a lot of other things. We pay little, so people don't come to us. Serious salaries are paid at enterprises that make a profit. That's a simple truth, and you, as a manager, a leader, should know that and explain it to your subordinates, Sarah said proudly. I know, Ms. Roberts, and I completely agree with you. That's what I tell Johnny, my last fitter, every day first thing in the morning. Johnny, look, wait, and as soon as profit pours in, you'll immediately get a serious salary. Stevens looked at her without the slightest hint of laughter. She sighed deeply. A terrible man. Although he looks, of course. Yes, he looks. Wait, what was she thinking about? Stop calling me Mary A. I am Sarah. Now let's talk specifically about your affairs. I looked at the reports on equipment maintenance and operating costs. My hair stood on end. Oh, what profit can we talk about when, with horrific expenses, the utilization rate of machines and lines is below 40%? Are you completely out of your mind? Can you explain this to me as the chief engineer? I can, he nodded. Just for fairness, let's first rename me the chief antiquarian keeper of antiquity, because half of our equipment has long existed only in these papers. He pushed several folders towards her. And what's left? It works, thank goodness, at the percentages you mentioned, esteemed Ms. Roberts, with God's help and ours. And yes, you are not Mary A., I remember. Listen, Stevens, let's talk seriously, she said after a pause. You understand that with the current state of affairs, it's more profitable for the holdings management to close the factory than to invest huge sums in it. Well, yes, of course it's more profitable. And no need to think about the 1,000 people who will be left without work. And do you know that we have 9 dynasties of hereditary factory masters? And the fact that we still make the best quality products on our old junk, there's little of it, but it's the best. He waved his hand. Well, all right, wait. Granted, you have excellent masters in production, but the specialists, they're useless. I spent 2 days checking the accounting entries and reporting. You're Vera Nichols. Her knowledge is that of a technical college graduate, and she's the chief accountant. And Vera is a technical college graduate. And even if she's lacking something there, she's an honest person and works for 3. Stevens frowned. You know, Ms. Roberts, I've been working here for 10 years, and not once has a single city girl in suede shoes come here to work during my time. Then maybe we would have a great chief accountant. Yes, it's easy for you to say. You were born here, you live here, probably your whole life. Do you think it's easy to just pick up and move to this backwater? Oh, by the way, I've been meaning to ask you, where did you get your Moscow diploma? She suddenly remembered. By chance, Ms. Roberts, just like the position of chief engineer. A complete misunderstanding. He smiled. Stop calling me Mary A., Sally corrected him habitually, more to catch her breath. All right, Chris Stevens, you can go. Thank you. You're welcome, not Maria Roberts, he said and left. Now how can you have a normal conversation with a person like that? Oh, come now, Ms. Roberts. How is he local? Stevens, he's your compatriot, a native Muscovite. Did he study there? Yes. His parents still live there. He visits them on vacation. The girl from the HR department was terribly flattered by the attention of the city auditor, and especially by the fact that the lady was clearly inquiring about Stevens, confidentially, so to speak. You know, I don't know all the details, of course, and I don't like gossip, but Chris Stevens is, well, simply a romantic hero to us. He had some personal tragedy there, in Moscow, something terrible. That's why he left and came here. And he lives here. Well, simply like some kind of monk, can you imagine? With his looks. George Alexander's. Sarah mumbled into the receiver, embarrassed. Why is Stevens hanging around here anyway? Interested? Did Chris get to you? George suddenly sounded pleased. In what way? What are you saying? Sally protested, indignant. He's just, how can I put it, unusual maybe. He has... Sally, his life is in complete ruins. His wife was pregnant and died. That happened a long time ago, many years ago. That's why he's been wandering the world alone ever since. But fortunately, he's suffering in the vicinity of our factory. Everything there depends on Chris. Well, I think you've already realized that yourself. Imagine, this man has a lot of rather grim things behind him, and yet he sometimes acts like a stand-up comedian, she thought then. And a few days later, perhaps the most terrifying episode of her life occurred. That day, she got caught up with documents and left the factory office when the dense August twilight had already settled. The hotel where Sarah was staying during her business trip was not far, a couple of stops away, but it was late, and waiting for a bus seemed like a questionable activity. I'll take a walk, Sarah decided, remembering a shady alley shown to her by someone from the factory, which stretched through a semi-abandoned park, cutting a decent portion of the way and leading right to the hotel. Sally inhaled the refreshed evening air with pleasure and briskly padded along the tiled path. And suddenly, 2 figures emerged silently from the darkness, as if woven from the air. One quickly stepped onto the path in front of Sarah, and the second behind her, cutting off her retreat. All right, the one standing in front drawled in a low male voice. However, it was already clear that these were tall, stocky men. In the twilight, due to the terror that gripped her entire body, they seemed simply enormous. Well, well, what a fairy. And not bad herself. And such a promising handbag. Right, Al? He continued. The one standing behind mumbled something indistinctly, clearly sharing the admiration for the woman and her handbag. All right, lady. Let's do this the nice way. If we come to an agreement, nothing will happen to you. Well, what do I mean nothing? Nothing too bad. A gentleman's word. He laughed. Listen, do you need money? Sarah finally managed to overcome the spasm in her throat. I only have a card, but I'll tell you the code. Here, please take it. She tried to open her bag with trembling hands. Of course you'll tell me absolutely, but that's later. Afterwards, the man said, relaxing. She couldn't fully make out his face because of the dark hood pulled low over it, but she could see dark stubble, among which teeth gleamed in a terrible grin. A real beast, the thought flashed through her mind. In fact, compared to this creature, who was called a human only by mistake, even the hungriest, most vicious wolf in a dark forest would have seemed like a harmless puppy. And of course, she didn't believe his assurances for a second that he supposedly wouldn't do anything too bad to her. I wonder how quickly they'll find me, if they find me at all. And if they do, will there be anything to send to Mom? Well, I took a shortcut, you miserable idiot, Sally suddenly thought, somehow detachedly, almost calmly. Please, please don't touch me, she said in a trembling, breaking voice. Oh, come now, madam. I'm a well-mannered man. Did you notice? I'm not even using you informally, but continue to address you respectfully. He chuckled. I told you, I'm a gentleman. For some reason, after that phrase, Sarah became especially frightened. If they had been simple ruffians, drunk and high on something nasty, there would have been hope of persuading them, bribing them, stalling for time, or ultimately, just trying to break free and run away. But before her stood two sturdy, firmly planted scoundrels, radiating waves of malice and cruelty. Hear that, gentlemen? She suddenly heard a quiet, firm voice. Get out of the way. Let the person pass. From the terror that paralyzed her, she couldn't even turn to look at the unexpected fairy tale-like help. However, it wasn't necessary. The new character in this grim scene appeared from somewhere to the side, and resolutely, ignoring the men who had perked up, pushed Sarah behind him, moving her towards the edge of the alley. Oh, what a lucky day today, right, Al? The one in the hood grinned. Check out the jacket on this guy. You've wanted one like that for a long time, haven't you? Come on, buddy, take off your jacket and get out of here fast. I have a date with the madam here. Doesn't look like it, the unexpected protector chuckled, whose voice, now that Sarah had emerged from her stupor, seemed familiar. You don't have flowers, and the lady isn't throwing herself around your neck. Sarah raised her head and fixed her gaze on the speaker's back. He was sturdy, but far from being a thug. He was shorter, smaller, and clearly weaker. So, a rival, huh? The man in the hood bared his teeth like an animal again. And I don't tolerate rivals. I simply eliminate them, literally. He slowly drew his hand from his pocket, and a blade glinted brightly in his fist in the lamplight. All right, the evening is ceasing to be romantic, the man standing in front of Sarah muttered. She squeezed her eyes shut in terror, and when she opened them, she blinked in astonishment. Still clutching the knife in his hand, the attacker, met with a move, fell to the ground with a look of surprise on his face and fell silent. The man stepped on his hand with the knife, added a quick, precise blow to the head, and straightened up. It was Stevens. He quickly smiled at the astonished Sarah and turned to the second bandit. You wanted to take my jacket? Chris grumbled. The guy mumbled something indistinctly and lunged, and a second later choked on a gurgle, running into a fist. Stevens's second fist landed on the top of his head, and suddenly, Perhaps because of the helpless expression that appeared on his face, he seemed like a boy to Sarah. Almost a child. "Oh, you'll kill him!" Sally blurted out. "Why are you beating him?" She asked this almost indignantly, as if just minutes ago this very guy hadn't threatened her with a terrible fate. Stevens looked at Sarah in surprise and shook his head, and she, relieved from danger, hating herself for it, instead of thanking him for saving her, suddenly said in a nasty voice, "By the way, brute force isn't always the best argument, and anyway, we need the police." Stevens nodded seriously and took his phone from his pocket. "Station. Who?" "Captain Smith." "Oh, Petey, hello. Yep, it's me." Stevens smiled broadly. "Pete, good to hear from you. When did you get back? They said you went to Baikal for fishing." "Yeah, I was there." "Ah, Petey, you're a pig. You know, you could have invited me." "All right. So, how about the Omel? You don't say, what were you catching them on? A jig? Listen, have you tried?" Chris stood there chatting on the phone as if he were sitting in an armchair at home, not standing in the middle of a dark alley where bandits lay 2 steps away, and beside him she, Sarah, was trembling and sobbing, apparently having a delayed hysterical fit. "Oh, Pete. All right. You'll tell me everything in detail later. Why am I calling, Captain? I need you to send a patrol. We have 2 citizens relaxing here, one with a very sharp knife, and a beautiful woman they scared badly. And also," he looked at Sarah ironically and chuckled, "I need to be detained and interrogated about exceeding the limits of self-defense." "Why jokes, Pete? I mean Captain. This citizen insists that I could have acted more gently somehow. Although, you know," he suddenly bent down, looking closely at the face of the man lying down, from whom the hood had slipped. "Looks like gentleness wouldn't have worked here. It seems to me this is Vicky, your longtime charge." "What's this, Petey? He's wandering around free? Got out again?" "Oh, excellent. How happy I am for him. Released, you see, and apparently straight to the library." And he brought a knife to carefully cut the stuck pages. "You're something else, Captain Petey. He's scaring people, and you're fishing on Baikal." "All right, send them over. We're waiting on our old alley, right near the former stand with the former leading workers of the former production." "Can you ever be serious?" Sarah asked him when he put the phone back in his pocket. "Ms. Roberts, I am very serious, really. And now that I've seen who exactly attacked you here, I'm even slightly scared, honestly. If I had known it was Vicky the repeat offender, I would never have gotten involved. Well, you see, since it happened, please forgive me for beating him up. Don't file a police report against me." "Okay." Stevens looked down with a guilty, repentant expression. You're a clown, you are!" she burst out indignantly. "You're ready to make a circus out of everything. I'm tired of repeating myself. I am not Mary A. I am Sarah. Sarah, 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 Sally, Sally Kins." Someone gently but noticeably shook her by the shoulder. "Sally Kins, my dear. Wake up, get up. It's been morning for a long time. My, how you slept. It's clear you love traveling by train." Sarah slowly opened her eyes. Anne Johnson and Zoe were sitting opposite her, smiling, as if contemplating a sleepy and rumpled face with hair sticking up was the most pleasant thing imaginable. "Morning?" Sarah asked, astonished. "Did I sleep all night?" "And how?" the old woman laughed. "It was a pleasure to watch and listen." Sally looked in astonishment at her reflection in a small mirror. Wow, she lay down to think about life. She didn't remember when the memories turned into a sound and unusually long sleep. "Sally Kins, why did we decide to wake you?" Anne Johnson smiled. "Please don't be angry, dear, but we're having a guest come now. So you should wash up and comb your hair, and we'll have breakfast." "A guest!" Sarah exclaimed in surprise and suddenly noticed that both her compartment neighbors were dressed in nice tracksuits, had clearly styled their hair as much as travel conditions allowed, and had even, good heavens, put on some lipstick. Yes, Chrissykins. I mean Chris Stevens, Anne declared. Well, not exactly a guest, actually. He's coming to fix our lock, because the door to our compartment is sticking. Zoe and I barely got out this morning. We don't have such heroic sleep as you do, Sallykins. Anne laughed softly. Fix the door. Chris, Sarah said, bewildered, and didn't even immediately realize that for the first time his name didn't cause her irritation, but joy. She listened to herself in astonishment and asked, "And who gave him permission to fix anything here anyway?" "Oh, come now, Sallykins. Chris has golden hands. He's already fixed half the breakdowns in the carriage. He fixed the Titan, several outlets. Even the conductor can't praise him enough. She even gave him a little bottle of tincture, and he told us he'd finish his business and come to us with that bottle. So, Sallykins, you should dress up too, because he's such a—" And Anne sighed lyrically and shyly. Stevens came, and not alone, but with his neighbor, the same intelligent-looking man who had boarded with the Crossword magazine. "Well, Chris," the man said, holding the compartment door open, "how skillfully you manage everything. It's simply amazing. You're truly a master. And I, frankly, at first thought you were some kind of scientist. You won't believe it." He turned to the ladies. "I considered myself an experienced crossword solver, but compared to Chris, I'm nothing. He just knows everything. For example, do any of you know which admiral sank the Turkish fleet in the Battle of Chesme? And which classic Russian writer discovered 20 new species of butterflies? And what is the unit of measurement for odor intensity?" "No, well, neither do I, or I don't remember. But he knows. All the answers to all the questions." The man laughed. "Simply some kind of magician." "Oh, come on, Arthur Leons." Chris chuckled, checking the repaired lock. "Well, I know a few things. Some things you can just think about and guess, even if you don't know." "For example?" the present company asked eagerly. "Well, for example, this question. Which living creature has its brain located furthest from its heart?" All right, interesting. And who is it?" Anne Johnson and Zoe exclaimed, throwing up their hands. "Well, think about it. Estimate the distance. Figure it out. There's a little task for you. It'll last you halfway." Chris smiled. "Oh, come now, Chrissykins. Chris Stevens. We'll never guess." "No, you must tell us," the women worried. "We'll just torment ourselves. Please tell us." "A giraffe," Sally said softly. "A giraffe's brain is furthest from its heart." Chris looked at her and nodded silently, barely perceptibly. And the minutes, the hours, flew by with such speed that she didn't even notice how the journey, which had seemed unbearable and endless, came to an end. And now she waited with dread for the train's last stop, the last look at him, the last touch of that strong but tender hand with the marks of machine oil permanently ingrained in the skin. After saying goodbye to everyone, Chris suddenly turned, quickly walked over to her, and slipped a piece of paper into her hand. "Ms. Roberts, Sarah, Sally, perhaps we will never see each other again, but just promise me one thing. If you need help, if you need me, just call me. I'll do anything for you." He looked at her attentively, honestly, and desperately, and she saw recognition in those eyes. His recognition of something for which words were unnecessary. Chris picked up his bag and quickly strode towards the carriage exit. "Oh, Sallykins, forgive me, of course," she heard Anne Johnson's voice. "Zoe and I certainly won't see you again. And this is what I'll tell you, dear. You, Sallykins, are a silly girl. I mean, forgive me again, just a fool. He loves you. And you love him. Even a half-blind old woman like me can see that. Ah, Sarah, well, giraffes are alive." When George spoke about her worthless family life before Sally's business trip, he himself didn't suspect how close he was to the truth. That life, that family and everything else, had long ceased to exist for her. She and Alan had lived together for almost 8 years and never understood why they had spent those years together. And it had never been so hard to return to her apartment as after those weeks at the factory and 2 amazing days on the train. "Sarah, I've filed for divorce," she heard from Alan as soon as she stepped through the door. "Sal, I know you'll be unhappy. It's all somehow unexpected, undignified maybe. I don't know, but I think you're the only one who's done well." "Thank you," she said. "I've never been so grateful to you in all these years. Thank you." Sarah grabbed her astonished and frightened husband, or rather, ex-husband, by the hand and shook it. She rushed out of the apartment, despite all Alan's attempts to explain something about the court, property division, apartment documents, and some other nonsense that was completely irrelevant to her now. She wanted only one thing: to dial the number written on the piece of paper and hear his voice say her name, slightly twisting it in his simple way. "Mary A." And he answered so quickly that the first ring hadn't even faded, as if he had been waiting for her call continuously. They sat on a comfortable bench under an old maple tree, which was already noticeably highlighted by autumn colors. "You know, Chris," she said, feeling his warmth, tenderness, and strength, sensing it with every cell of her body and melting with such simple and easy happiness. "It's amazing, because back then, well, when we ended up on the same train, at first I thought I simply hated you, didn't I? And now, just a few days later, I don't understand how I could have lived without you for so many years. Unthinkable." "Well, what's so unclear and amazing about that, Sally? You know the saying, from love to hate is one step. And who said the path from hate to love is longer?